If you're here, you're already too deep to turn back. Tonight isn't just another night. It's the night we've been moving towards all along. The night we rip away the final mask. Welcome to the last episode of Season 1. This whole journey, chapter by chapter, night by night, has been leading us deeper into the anatomy of who we really are. And tonight we finally open the wound and see what's inside. What does it truly mean to be human? What lies beneath the brilliant surface of genius, the glittering facade of culture, the comforting illusions of morality? Tonight, Nevzorov's truth comes full circle. Alexander Nevzorov isn't just an author. He's the last philosopher standing, the last voice I trust in a world choked by polite lies and soothing myths. His words cut through me, and I couldn't let them stay trapped inside one language. This podcast, Nox, was my attempt to set his truth free, to bring it to you, to everyone bold enough to listen, to those brave enough to face their reflection without flinching. In this final episode, we'll confront the bitter mechanics behind genius itself, why it's always tragic, always misunderstood, always hunted. And we'll reveal why fascism never truly dies, why it just waits patiently beneath the surface, ready for humanity to look the other way again. But first, if you haven't yet, this is your chance. All the links to our social media, podcast platforms, and Alexander Nevzorov's unyielding anti-war voice, his YouTube channel, are in the description below. The original Russian version of his book is waiting for you on Amazon. Subscribe, follow, and hold on tight. Tonight is no ordinary night. Tonight we leave behind comfort. We abandon illusions. Tonight we cut deeper. Let's open the wound and see what's inside. Chapter 18. The Mechanics of Genius. From our list of historical geniuses, only 27 spared civilization the trouble of silencing them. They politely and voluntarily removed themselves from this world, saving the church and authorities the expense of firewood and informers. Such modest figures, however, were a minority. Most geniuses learned firsthand about dungeons, poisonings, and the occasional roasting of their rebellious personas. Others succumbed to harsh illnesses, typically broke, forgotten, and bedridden with festering sores. Today, civilization comforts the persecuted geniuses of the past. Their names grace lunar craters, and children in school books draw bruises on their faces. It's undoubtedly an honor, but bruises and craters are posthumous pleasures. Pyres and bedsores were the real-time rewards. Moreover, thinking itself is a poisonous habit, extremely inconvenient in everyday life. It has the power to spoil all the simple joys of existence. It evaporates authority, ideals, and art. Culture and public opinion lose their grip entirely. Yes, thinking grants freedom, but whoever acquires this freedom quickly realizes that there's nothing left in the world worth taking seriously. There's something known as the anatomist's curse. It's alive and well today, but it began with Vesalius, who dissected human corpses with fanatical precision. Complete dissection requires removing the skin entirely, including the face, with its nose, eyelids, lips, eyelashes, and moles. This mask is peeled off whole and hung up on a hook. The subject is left staring wide-eyed, grinning grotesquely, muscles fully exposed. Muscles that once animated that face. Eventually, the anatomist develops the ability to see everyone as if their skin were removed. Anger, laughter, both appear equally absurd when played out by that bulging-eyed, muscular construct. It certainly allows for ironic interactions with any living interlocutor, but once acquired, you can never be rid of this curse. Thinking works similarly. It strips skin not only from faces but makes skulls transparent, revealing brains and their simple inner workings. History, faith, and art resemble old alarm clocks. Covers removed, glass unscrewed, mechanisms exposed and ticking cheaply within. This clarity of vision is supremely uncomfortable. It transforms almost everything dear to humans into ridiculous absurdities. It forbids respect for the fundamental illusions of human existence, ridicules authority, and renders all ideals laughable. Unity with the human herd is lost forever. The sacred gallery of ancestral heroes becomes a pathetic costume show of drooling imbeciles, better forgotten quickly. You can't hide contempt forever. Eventually you slip up, and displaying contempt for humanity's foundations on a planet of fools guarantees serious trouble. That's why many geniuses tried to rid themselves of thinking altogether, or at least weaken its grip. Many found relief in religion or art. On every count, choosing genius as a profession appears foolish and mistaken. And this conclusion is correct. Thinking takes much and gives nothing back. Uncovering the mysteries of matter and life might sound noble, but almost no one cares, and it pays poorly. Yes, it can be amusing to break down humanity's cherished dogmas. The nonsense comprising 99% of human beliefs appears immense and eternal. But even the smallest drop of real thinking makes this vast construction hiss, smoke, and crumble into dust. It's entertaining briefly, but quickly grows tiresome. Yet here, finally, we can confidently equate thinking with genius. Clearly, neither exists without the other. Clearly, genius is simply an exotic, extremely rare craft. Primarily, it's chosen by those individuals who have little hope of making a career as a notary or achieving the rank of colonel. Frequently, genius becomes the refuge of people from the lowest social origins, those who have no chance even to begin climbing society's ladder. Some very respectable geniuses emerge from anatomical freaks or individuals with dysfunctional reproductive organs. In such cases, obsessive devotion to science is the only option. Let's note clearly that thinking has practical use only in this peculiar profession, the profession of genius. In all others, it's unusable and entirely unnecessary. Here's a simple example. A uroflowmeter is a sophisticated, beautiful, and expensive device designed to measure urine flow. But despite its elegance, it can't be adapted for anything but urogynecology. On the battlefield, it's pointless. In a bank, absurd. In a restroom, redundant. In parliament, impractical. Casinos, libraries, woodworking shops, all inappropriate venues. Yes, you could put it on stage at a circus, amusing audiences with a routine involving urinating clowns. But the device's data would be meaningless, distorted, and absurd. Accuracy in Euroflow readings doesn't interest clowns. They just need a visually striking, scientific-looking vessel with blinking lights to pee into. Similarly, thinking can also be employed in culture, without any meaning, merely as amusing decoration. It belongs solely in science, nowhere else. True, there were exceptions. Lamettrie, D'Holbach, and a few atheist provocateurs weren't scientists, yet mastered thinking's scandalous power far better than many scientists themselves. They were the first to grasp the explosive potential that arises when precise knowledge is melted down into simple concepts. They first recognized science's particular beauty once it's entirely stripped of scientific pretension. These pirates of intellectual seas built the skeleton and nervous system of modern intellectualism, onto which science later attached muscle and acne. Incidentally, Lamettrie and his fellow troublemakers whipped scholarship forward with admirable effectiveness. And to this day, science still limps obediently in the direction these hooligans pointed out. Like every profession, genius had its ancestral starting point. It could be identified, but first it would require great effort. And second, at its inception, genius was as miserable-looking as any other initial human endeavor. Embryology describes something called a morula, a tiny cluster of 16 microscopic spheres forming a lumpy berry visible only under a microscope. The morula appears in the womb 4 days after conception. Such a tiny cluster was every placental animal, including the author of these lines. But since we're discussing microscopes, recognizing a morula attached to the uterine wall of Margaret van den Berg, a basket weaver from Delft, as her future son, Mr. Leeuwenhoek, would have been nearly impossible. This brilliant microscope enthusiast, bewigged, skilled, and excitable, bore no resemblance to the berry in the uterus, yet he was its direct continuation. The original point of genius looks equally repulsive compared to its current state. To put it more bluntly, bread, for instance, began when some nameless ancient fool vomited up chewed grain, probably due to gluttony. He wandered away, leaving behind this mass. A day later, another prehistoric character found this vomit, dried out, and ate it. Thus, bread was born. This scene had to repeat hundreds of times until someone figured out they could chew, vomit, and dry the grain themselves. Eventually, young slaves with fresh teeth took over chewing duties. Later, stones replaced slaves' mouths, efficiently crushing grain. Then grinding replaced crushing, and grain mush evolved into flour. Thousands of years passed before humanity ended up with croissants. Genius at its inception looked as appetizing as that vomit pile, invisible as a marula in the womb of Margaret Vandenberg. In short, sometimes it's better not to peek at births, nor stick your nose into a womb or cradle, especially in a painful matter like the birth of a genius. Too great is the risk of seeing something petty and disappointing? Like any profession, genius evolved step by step, and nobody could skip even one stage. Genius of any caliber remains trapped by the perspectives of its era. Let me illustrate. Give Sir Isaac Newton an iPhone, and you'll see a bewildered idiot. Yes, Isaac was an expert on secret springs opening reliquaries and little poison compartments. He might press the power button, lighting up the screen, but then things get fascinating. Bewilderment gives way to a wise smirk. Newton, an alchemist with 30 years' experience, would instantly conclude the flat box contains alkahest, the mystical cold flame, the great wedding of elements. He might wrap the device and rush to the nearest Inquisition office. Possible, but unlikely. Instead, he'd explore it himself, using methods of his era, chiseling off a third, pounding it with mortar and pestle, mixing in red tincture and blackberry leaves, heating crushed iPhone fragments over an alchemical burner. Observing changes in flame color, he'd form primitive conclusions, and the results of history's greatest intellectual exploring an iPhone with his 17th century methods would be hilariously absurd. Sadly, geniuses have no chance to glimpse dissertations yet to appear centuries later. Newton's mistakes weren't stupidity, but proof that genius doesn't give wings to fly over time. All discoveries follow accumulation. Without accumulation, genius simply doesn't exist. End of chapter 18. You've just heard a chapter that explains why genius was never meant to survive. Not in a world like this. Not among a species that fears clarity more than death. Nevzorov didn't just describe the anatomy of genius. He performed the autopsy. With that same sharpness, same scalpel, he sliced through everything we pretend to admire. And what spilled out? Bed sores, dungeons, firewood, dissected faces, Euroflow meters. Truth. If you're still here, then you've already seen too much to look away. You know now, genius is not a gift, it's an exile. Thinking is not a virtue, it's a liability, a beautiful radioactive mistake. And yet, this mistake is everything I believe in. That's why I'm here. That's why I translated these words. That's why I built this podcast, Nox. To let this voice echo in another language, in another country, in another brain that refuses to sleep. So before we continue, before we cross into the final chapter, do something simple and vital. Stay connected. Every link you need is right below. To the full book, to Nevzorov's anti-war channel, to the next place this voice will go. Subscribe. Follow. Don't lose the thread. This is the last intermission, and the next chapter, the last one, is not a continuation. It's a collapse. So take this moment. Let the music take you apart. Let it hold you before we cut deeper. Because when we come back, you'll see what genius looks like when it dies. Enjoy. still here. That says something. The track was Piece of Myself, Pulley and Chamba remix by Daniel Hokum and Max Kaplevsky. But peace is a myth, and you know that. That's why you're still listening. That music was a breath. One last exhale before we cut the cord. What comes next isn't a continuation. It's a collapse. We're entering the final chamber, the last words, the last wound, the last genius. This isn't where we understand, it's where we surrender. So don't brace yourself. Let it hit you. Let it dismantle everything you thought you were. This is the end of the line. Let's finish it. Chapter 19. The Last Genius. The fact that Newton's breakthrough was made in 1687 is not a triumph. It's a disgrace. Of all the mysteries of the universe, gravity is the dumbest. And it still took Homo sapiens 5,000 years to figure it out. 5 millennia slapping the label sapiens on their own foreheads. And who were they trying to impress? What kind of show-off move is that exactly? Who was supposed to read this title and be dazzled? Kangaroos? Hippos with bad eyesight? Suspicious ostriches convinced Homo just wants their feathers? The truth is simple. There are no mysteries. Mystery is just a vulgar absence of knowledge. And yet, here we are in the 21st century, and we've suddenly discovered 1,000 new ones. Worse, these so-called mysteries seem to breed. They interact, interlock, multiply. Meanwhile, science has made modest progress. Everything we've figured out is the easy stuff. Cosmology, quantum mechanics, observations and comparisons. Basic blocks. But the real problems? We can't touch them. Take time, for instance. It's the black mark slapped onto Homo's palm by the smirking universe. And we haven't moved an inch, not a single working definition, just piles of broken theories. Why? Because the method of science, the one we saw with Newton, can't be applied here. There's no handle to grab, no chain to pull, no ledge to start the climb. Geniuses have attacked the problem of time for centuries. The ground is littered with shattered teeth, Einstein's, Hawking's, and countless others. But the door won't budge. Modern science handles time with the same dumbfounded expression that Newton would have worn staring at an iPhone. Same tools, same dead ends. Every attempt, whether from Pound, Planck, or Newton, resembles an alchemist jabbing a gadget with a glowing iron. Let's face it, the question is beyond human capacity and won't be answered in 100 years. Or 2. Fine. Screw time. Let's try something simpler. What is a human being? That at least seems solvable. But Sapiens doesn't want the answer. Science already spat in humanity's face once, with Darwin and Pavlov. The myth of man, so carefully constructed by culture, was pierced straight through the heart. Lies took the hit. Homo took the pain, and quickly realized nothing good ever comes from natural science. Darwin and Pavlov weren't the worst of it. Science was only warming up. Its steps grew lighter, faster, too fast. Humans started feeling the urge to break its legs. But the dungeons of the Inquisition gathered dust. The bonfires went cold. Their grandkids now sell tickets for tours. No one's left to defend the sanctity of man. No more torturers. No one to yank the nose of some nosy genius with red-hot pliers. So humanity had to invent a new leash. Something better than lead poured down the throat. They found it. Morality. Oh yes. Morality can cripple anything. It took work, but the job got done. Science grew a massive hunchback of ethics and buckled beneath it. Its stride was shortened, its knees twisted. Gone was Giordano Bruno, proudly walking into flame. Replaced by a hunched lab rat begging for grants, desperate not to offend. This goblin knows his place, licks the hands of ministers, of donors, of the mob. And the moment ethics took the wheel, the dream of ever discovering what a human truly is died. And yet there was a moment, a tiny window, a brief chance. It came after Darwin and Pavlov had knocked culture flat. There was a time when vivisection, in vivo experiments, freak shows, and human zoos were tolerated, sometimes even admired. The air hadn't yet been fouled by ethics. Science wasn't limping. In that narrow window, the truth was within reach. To finally understand the species called human, we needed only one thing: a sealed, controlled habitat. A vivarium for people. One that raised them from birth, cut off from language, knowledge, civilization. A pure rewind. Back to the Paleolithic. These children of the 20th century, raised like beasts of 1,000,000 years ago, would have shown us everything. What the Homo brain really does. What games it plays with rocks. And yes, it's cannibalism, coprophagy, promiscuity. An invisible observer could watch, in full clarity, a being gnawing on a severed infant's leg, and realize what to expect from himself and from his fellow man. No more Auschwitz, no more speculation. At the vivarium exit, we'd have oak beams and ropes prepared, so the priests, psychologists, and Kantian ethicists could hang themselves with grace and ceremony. But we missed that chance. That moment is gone. The hunchback now commands the system, and its host. Today, a human vivarium would be declared a crime against humanity, even though its residents would be better off than most prisoners on Earth. They'd live in spacious, scenic wilderness, free to be what they are, not what they pretend to be. Luckily, no one will suggest such a project now, because the descendants of Paleolithic scavengers have lost all curiosity. So the raw, brilliant, brutal truth of human nature remains unknown, and the origins of genius stay a riddle, which frankly is for the best. People love their myths too much. Better to leave the toy unbroken. Let them keep dreaming. There's not much time left anyway. Lies are excellent entertainment, but they make a lousy foundation for civilization. And now we can close the book. Yes, genius exists. It's not magic. It's just a profession. It's shaped by the environment, not by special brains. The doors are open to everyone, but the number of actual geniuses keeps shrinking. Even now, when no one's burning them at the stake, they vanish faster and faster. The last one? Stephen Hawking in his wheelchair. Right now, there are none. Why? Because we've built a myth. A myth that genius is a sacred gift, bestowed by forces unknown, unreachable by ordinary homo. Culture won that battle too. It crushed common sense. It smothered thought itself. And so, staring into the marble eyes of the sacred pantheon, not a single person will ever realize. They could have been one of them. End of chapter 19. End of book. So that's it. The end of the book. The end of Season 1. But not the end of the war. What you've just heard wasn't literature. It was an autopsy of genius, of truth, of the species itself. Nevzorov didn't write to comfort. He wrote to burn. And what he described, the decay of intellect, the worship of myth, the transformation of fear into faith, that isn't theory. It has a name. Putin. And it has a body count, a flag, an anthem. It is the final form of Homo sapiens when thinking dies. It is Russia, today. 140 million people. Not enslaved, not hunted, just silent. Here's what silence looks like when you measure it in real numbers. Nazi Germany, 1933 to 1945. Over 800,000 people were arrested for resisting. Tens of thousands were executed. There were underground newspapers, sabotage cells, and attempts on Hitler's life. They resisted knowing they would die. Tortured, hanged, beheaded. Russia, 2022 to 2024. 20,081 people were arrested for protesting an invasion. 0 executed. 372 are in prison today. No underground, no sabotage, no organized resistance. Not even leaflets. Let's put that in perspective. Germany, where resistance meant a noose, produced 100 times more courage than modern Russia. where the worst consequence is prison. That's not oppression, that's complicity. Only 0.014% of Russians took any risk to oppose this war. That's one person out of every 7,000. The rest? They filmed tanks with their phones, they changed the subject. They shrugged. They drank. Let that number burn into your skull. For every 7,000 Russians, one dared to speak. The rest? They watched. They nodded. Some filmed themselves applauding tanks rolling into Ukraine. That's the truth. That's the proof. And that's why I made this podcast, to translate not just words, but resistance, to throw this truth in the face of a world that still wants to pretend Russia is a victim and not a fucking cult of death. Because evil doesn't need applause to win. It only needs silence. And I won't be silent. Not now. Not ever. This podcast, this season, this work, was my act of resistance. Because I still believe even now, even after everything, that good can win. But only if it speaks. Only if it fights. Only if it refuses to forgive. So don't forgive. Don't forget. And don't look away. The voice continues. Links below. To the book. To Nevzorov's fire. To the next resistance. Thank you for staying to the end. Thank you for not bowing your head. Thank you for still believing that words can stop a war. That truth can still wound. That good can still fucking win. In night we trust.